Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hello, everybody. It's very much my privilege to be talking with all of you today about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. My background training is as a speech language pathologist. However, working in hospitals and schools, I got very interested in families and the fact that children years later were not doing as well as we thought they were doing when they left hospitals. And so it actually drove me back to get a PhD in counseling psychology with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy. So that's where my research got started, and my interest in kids with traumatic brain injury and family support came from. Along the way, I met a lot of people who were very influential in my life in looking at family systems. And today, people like Karen Gann and Jeff Kreutzer and Marilyn Lash, who have for years led this cry and have allowed me to travel with them. But mostly, I really want to thank the individuals who have sustained a traumatic brain injury and their family members, because we can take all the literature and all the research and all the work that we've all done, and it would be nothing if it weren't for what we are all learning from families and their children. So my thanks to all those individuals. Today, I want to have some learning outcomes which are up for you. We're going to look at family resilience versus burden, look at family responses and coping mechanisms, personal coping and communication styles of us, as well as family, and list some methods for family meaningfully.
Yeah.
And some things that are questions that we're going to talk about today are, number one, who's the real expert? What coping strategies can be used with families? What communication behavior is primary compared to what families might be using? What can we learn from families who have a member with a disability from other disability groups, traumatic brain injury? How do we include the family meaningfully? I already know that I probably have too many slides, and so we'll go as rapidly as we can and try to cover these areas. So first, when we want to include the family, the first question that I think we have to ask is, who really is the expert? And so traditionally, the assumption is that professionals are the experts, and I absolutely would agree with that. This slide actually comes from some work by Audrey Holland, who says, well, yes, of course, there are professionals who have the technical knowledge and the resources. We all went to school. We know the characteristics. We know how to diagnose, and we now know how to intervene. And so that means what we all know is about the disorder. But Holland also says, just take another minute here, because there are two more experts. That is the person who is living in the disorder, and that is those who live with the disorder. We don't live with our clients 24/7, but the family does. And so when we're talking with family members or professionals, team members, or what have you, I think that it's always good to remember that when in doubt, trust those who are living with the brain injury. So we were all trained primarily, whether we were in school or medical or social, depending on our background, we all were trained in problem-based models. And so what these problem-based models mean is that there is someone with a problem, and that's called the identified patient. And then those of us who have gone to school and have learned about this disability are the people who diagnose the problem. We learn to prescribe and determine what the treatment is going to be. And then sometimes individually or as a team, we decide how the treatment has gone and when we're going to discharge. And frankly, I like that model. If I have appendicitis, I like the physician to make a decision because he is the expert, and I want him to decide that he needs to do the surgery and get it done right away. I don't need a family meeting, and I don't need a team of experts to sit around and discuss my impending appendicitis. But when we're talking about our kids, some of those models, whether we learn that in special education or in social work or in medicine, they don't work necessarily with our kids, because our kids have ongoing educational issues, and it wasn't a one-time event that needs to be diagnosed and treated only once. The student is not isolated without the family. The family and the peers are always involved, and so it makes a much more complicated issue to deal with our kids because of that. Oftentimes in medical, social, educational models, we don't consider the family system, and we don't worry as much about what kind of a family system the kids might be coming from. And certainly within our model, up until very recently, culture and diversity is not considered. Back to the medical model, it doesn't matter who you are if you have appendicitis, the surgery is the same. However, in our dealings, I believe that the family system, the culture, and the diversity drive a lot of what we need to be able to consider. So let's talk a little bit about families and their resilience. Recent literature begins to say that many families really are able to cope after an injury. And while in a lot of the articles and chapters that we read about working with families, we see words like family burden. Many families with whom I have spoken and worked don't see themselves necessarily as burdened as much as they see themselves as challenged. And so I would ask you to think a little bit about the families that you work with who you like, the ones who are coping, the ones who are cooperating with you and who are positive. And I wonder what words you might type in right now if you were asked to. So I would like to just take a minute and ask you to type in a single word and have Melissa share with us, what are those families like that you enjoy working with?
So far we have positive, another repeat of positive, patient, resourceful, collaborative, hopeful, I like that one, flexible, reasonable, receptive, mentorship, advocates, they're understanding, they're responsive, they're determined.
Okay.
Strong faith-based, engaged.
Okay, thank you.
Let me see if I can find out who that is real quick.
Okay. So those are the words that we use all the time and we accept and get very enthused about. And yet we have other families who maybe because of socioeconomic, cultural, diverse, not engaged the way we would like, we find another whole set of words that we use about individuals. And so I just want to point out to you that many families that we even think are not working well with us are capable of some of the words that you have just suggested. And I want to talk more today in positive vein than I do the negative, although we will get to the end about families who are not cooperative, and we will talk about unhealthy families as we go along as well. So many families, the more recent research is showing that many are very resilient. And some of the most recent research is showing that less than 20% of the families indicate that they're dysfunctional after their child has a traumatic brain injury. We know, again, that if there's a more severe injury, families certainly have and express more concern and more difficulty in coping. And I like to include this quote from a dad who did have a severely injured child. He was on a panel, and I think I saw Janet Tyler's on, and this is a long time ago. He actually was on the panel and Janet was there. He said, we're not resilient. I just think we deal every day with what we need to do to get us through to the next day. And I think that's an absolutely perfect definition of a family who is resilient. And so many of the pieces of literature, as I mentioned, do speak of family burden after brain injury, and others think that there is resilience. And I know that there is because I just saw a list of 20 or 30 words that you all put down about your resilient family. And so I'm hoping that you begin to think a little bit about how you work with those families and how you might transfer some more helpful communication with families who are not being as communicative and helpful to you. So just like you to think a little bit about that as we go along. So what is the impact on the family after a traumatic brain injury? And so the literature tells us that parents or couples, these are the major things that tend to happen with them. We tend to see stress on a relationship. And it's interesting, I have to take a second to say to you, I've been in the field for a very long time. I'm retired, and so I've got 40 years of experience. And I've heard for years about the stress on relationships, and I don't deny that that's true. However, a research article that was done 40 years ago keeps cropping up, and that's the one that said that parents get divorced when their child has a traumatic brain injury. And of all the myths that keep going year after year, I don't know why we can't get some of the positive stories out there instead. Of all the myths that keep going, this is one. This research was repeated. And the question that was added to the second research study was, were you having marital problems as a couple prior to your child's brain injury? And when that question was factored in, the divorce rate turned out to be about 50%. And I've seen some recent literature that says that the divorce rate now in the country is 40 to 45%. So we're not really too far off of that. So I wish that if you're working with families and that whole situation comes up, that you assure them that they aren't necessarily headed for divorce. We can acknowledge and support the problems that they're having and support them with their strains and stresses without being convinced they're going to not be together. There's certainly, especially with insurance claims and lack of insurance coverage today for many of our clients, we certainly know that the families have financial burdens, and that does strain a family relationship, especially if one of the family members has to quit working in order to care for a child. There are a lot of concerns for maintaining what it can be considered normal, what I don't know what it is, but interactions. There come changes where sometimes you can't go to basketball games or to movies as you would like to and have done in the past. And the couple also finds difficulty finding personal time, and so sometimes we need to find out, is there a way that the two of you can once or twice a month go out on a date or be able to spend some personal time together. Impact on the extended family. Our extended family members get less direct information, and therefore they don't have the facts perhaps like the parents do, and the further away from the source of the facts you get, the less likely that information, the old telephone game, the less likely that information is being transmitted adequately. And so when family members don't know what to do, they try to keep things comfortable so that there's no more stress on the parents. And so they sometimes inadvertently do things that are not as supportive as they could be. Brothers and sisters also lack information. They are confused. And they expect, because of stories on TV, there used to be a program, well, now there's a new one called 911. There used to be another one on TV called 911. It was a 30 minutes. At the end of the 30 minutes, somebody was all cured and quite normal. So we sort of have this expectation that things are going to be okay. And so when our siblings find out that that's not the case, there's oftentimes a lack of understanding of that. We also have family members who don't want siblings told what's going on for fear they will worry. Let me just point out that when you don't know what's going on, what you make up is oftentimes worse than the truth. And peers are even further away, so they get even less information. Thus, my recommendation for all of these family members that websites, webinars, locations like CBERT that have great information probably should be made available to all extended family members so that they get some better information. I believe that if you want to know what's going on, you need to ask the person themselves. And this goes back to my belief that the person who has the brain injury is also the expert. And so I like to talk to them actually before sometimes I even talk to other family members or school members or what have you. And these are the questions I like to ask. How do you react to problems, and how do you get into troublesome situations? And I could ask each of you to tell me, how do you respond when you're in a difficult situation? Some of us get headaches, some of us get stomach aches, some of us turn red, some of us start extraneous motor movements. Oftentimes our kids, when they're feeling that stress or that upset, have those reactions and don't know it. And so finding out from them or observing them to find out, or asking family members, what's the antecedent? How do they behave when they're getting a little overly frustrated or a little upset? Helps us to work with them later. Also, it's good to ask these individuals, how do other people help you, and what do you think other people should help you to do? Oftentimes our kids will identify a teacher or one of the parents or siblings or someone else who actually does something to help them. They write it down. They take me to a quiet place. Whatever it is, those little ideas are the very ideas that help us to work better. And frankly, some of the best ideas that I've had in how to work with kids have come from parents who have some really good skills at figuring out what to do. Ways other people bother you. We had a young woman once who I was asked to come in and help with the tutor because she wasn't getting along with the student. And so I talked to the student first, and they give the tutor more information about brain injury. Turned out the tutor was standing and working with the child too close in her space and had breath. Those were the two things the student was worried about. And so giving the tutor more information about what to do with a person with brain injury wasn't really the solution. The student actually had the solution. And so what should others stop doing that sort of gets you not able to learn or to cooperate? The best time of day, as we know, some individuals, some of you get up early and do your work early in the morning. Others would rather work 9 to 6, and others would maybe rather work 3 to 9 at night. Our kids are the same way, and so always scheduling them for the most difficult work in the morning. And we do also have research that's telling us now specifically teenagers are not at their best sometimes in the morning. So finding out from them when their best time of day is tells us the best way to work with them, and the family often knows this. The family also can help us with knowing 3 skills that they want to improve. And I always like to ask, tell me something great about you. We are so stuck on asking what's wrong, what's the problem, let's diagnose what we need to do. And can usually tell us what's wrong, and the parents can usually tell us what's wrong. It's such a good technique to ask what's good. What do you do that's nice and talented? And every one of our kids has something that's great about them. So I always want to be sure that we've done that as well. So what are some coping strategies that are being used by families? These are strategies that are healthy and used by all of us. We have normal reactive responses. They are not abnormal. We have to be able to recognize our coping strategies versus those of the families with whom we work. This is a card by Mary Anklebright. I was sent this card a long time ago, and they said, Roberta, we think this is you. Early on in my research, I talked about dysfunctional families, and if there's anything I could do to get that publication back out of print, it's probably out of print anyway now, but because what I've learned is that pretty much there's no such thing as a dysfunctional family. There are families that are unhealthy and that don't necessarily have good coping strategies, but dysfunctional has become almost meaningless in the literature. There's no test for a dysfunctional family, and the literature itself doesn't really help us to understand what that actually means. I think that TV and maybe in the last year or so, even our news stations are proving that dysfunctional in a lot of areas, and all of us have our own opinion about what dysfunctional actually means. So it's a word that I recommend that we try and not use anymore. And so what we do have are normal reactive family patterns. And so these words all end in ing, because what it means is that when the time you're interacting with the family, you're oftentimes involved with these behaviors, but it doesn't mean that they're always like that. So some people are blaming, and those are difficult to work with because those are the individuals who are saying, what do you know about it? How many people have you worked with, like my kid? Have you read this article, et cetera, et cetera? And we tend to take that personally, and it tends to be difficult for us to be able to react with family members when we feel as if we're being blamed. What we have to remember with all of these is taking over and trying to say, I'm going to be in charge and not you. Family members who avoid, who don't want to talk about it, who don't show up for meetings, family members who deny that there's something going on with the child when we can see that something is going on, those who want to do their child and do their work for them, and those who use reasoning that does not appear to be functional and based in reality about what we're seeing with the child. But the thing of this is that all of these are behaviors that happen, and I've heard it explained as if we're riding on a roller coaster. And so when things are going okay, we're at the top of the roller coaster and we don't engage in these behaviors. But when a child starts to misbehave or not do well in school or not have social friends or what have you, we may engage in some of these behaviors. And what we as professionals have to remember, and as family members too, because I'm sure we have some family members listening as well, is that when anybody, and that includes professionals, are engaging in these behaviors, it's just because we're at that particular moment in time at the bottom of the roller coaster. But by working together, these behaviors change over time and we get back to the top of the roller coaster. So my point being here that these are all normal reactive patterns. They don't necessarily imply dysfunctionality, and we need to give each other a little bit of space when we're seeing these behaviors, and so that we can maybe move from those behaviors to other ways of communicating. And so for years, a colleague, Jean Blosser, and I did studies with family members, and we found that there are probably 5 different types of copers. And so as we go through these, I'd like to ask you to think a little bit about what is your primary style. We know that we all react with all of these styles, so, but when we are pushed, we pretty much end up with one primary style that we go to first. So, cognitive coper is the one who wants to read and learn about brain injury. They call national and state organizations. They want to talk to other family members. They do attend workshops. They are online. They attend the webinars. They use web internet, and they get lots of information. Many of us, I can guess, because you're on the seminar, are cognitive copers. Like to learn and read about information. If I were told that I had cancer, for example, I wouldn't be very far out of the physician's office before I was online asking for pamphlets and trying to read about it. But it doesn't mean that others cope like that. We do have psychological copers who take up a cause, who count their blessings, who replace negative thoughts with positive. And I used to say, we can recognize this because of the football coaches. Woody Hayes wrote a book on the power of positive thinking. And then I had an audience one day, and I was in Michigan, and they said, well, wait a minute, no, both wrote that book. And then I started one by one from other states, hearing that other football coaches have written replace negative thoughts with positive ones. And so I guess it really belongs to football in general and not one particular author. But we know that many of us do. We have those positive thinkers. And actually, a little earlier in the group, you made that suggestion yourself that the people that you like to work with are those positive thinkers. They're able to list their child's strengths, and they find even the tiniest improvements that are sometimes when we don't. We also have spiritual copers, those who do want to leave it in the hands of the Lord. They like to pray, read inspirational stories, and visit peaceful places. I had a family thank me and say that they didn't feel that people paid a lot of attention to spiritual coping. And so I just point out that this is another way that families do cope. Others use support systems, old and new friends. They do attend church not only for the spiritual support, but also for the people who are around them. They also join support groups and participate in community activities. So there are a lot of ways that people use their support systems as well. There are also physical copers. These are some who cry and laugh. We know that if you cry a lot or you laugh a lot till you cry, you do release endorphins in the brain, and you do feel a heck of a lot better after that's happening. So that's a form of physical coping, as is those who exercise, rest, take long walks, maintain normal routines, run, jog, listen to music, and clean and keep house. I had two things here. We do go on vacation, but we also like home. We start looking forward to our normal routines. And I had a fellow in my audience once say, well, if coping with stress and burden requires somebody to clean or keep house, my wife has never been stressed a day in her life. So we have all different kinds of opinions about this coping and how we all cope. And as I mentioned before, we all use parts of some of these, but when the actual moment hits, we tend to go to one of them. And so knowing what type of a primary coper you are becomes very important, because knowing how to respond to somebody who's not coping like you. For example, I'm a cognitive coper. I tend to hand out lots of pamphlets and websites and what have you. And then I talk to a family member, a week later, and I say, have you read that? And they say, oh, no, not really. And I can't understand it. It becomes very bothersome to me. So I need to understand, as we all do, that some of us are just simply different types of coping mechanisms that we use, and actually they're all pretty healthy. And so should families who cope differently be helped to change to another style of coping? Not unless it's becoming unhealthy for them. So what communication behavior is primary? One of the things we want to talk about here is we tend, as communicators working with families, to want to focus on the content, and that is the facts of the matter. We're very good when someone comes in and says, they're not making progress, at bringing out the information and showing why they did make progress, et cetera, et cetera. Oftentimes, people bring up content questions when they actually are dealing with process, and that's the underlying feelings. For example, if your child runs in front of a car, you get a hold of them on the other side of the street and you say to them, don't you ever do that again. The child may well perceive that as anger, and you may go into the car could hurt you, et cetera, et cetera. The process that you're dealing with is, and so many times when we get families who seem not to listen to us or not cooperate with them, I think we're dealing with families who are dealing with guilt and with fear about the future. And so sometimes us going off into lots of lectures about progress or lack thereof is not getting at the underlying process that the family actually needs the support with. Some recent work on social communication. I just want to say to you that social communication with our families is critically important. There's a lot of literature out. Some of it's called emotional IQ, emotional intelligence. But a lot of problems that we have dealing with families is because we don't read their speech style and content. We don't read because we feel that maybe they're being rude or they're interrupting us. We don't read their emotional competence. And so, or they're not reading ours particularly well. Eye contact, body language, we've had a lot of information about that in the past, but we need to be aware of our own as well as the pragmatic eye contact, the cultural differences with some people not being of our cultural background, and so eye contact and body language changes, and actually following the language, using the simplest language, the clearest language, the least technological language that we can, becomes very important for these individuals. And this is just a website for you with the American Speech and Hearing Association that you can get to, where you can look at a lot of social communication information on diagnosis and how to get better with pragmatics and communication skills. I also want to just quickly mention bullying because I think it's so important. We now know that social media is playing a huge part in bullying. What you may not know is that children and adolescents with disabilities are often the most bullied population, and that includes sexual assaults as well as physical assaults. And our kids are mostly at risk because they really don't have social communication skills, and they don't know how to handle being bullied. And it's not a matter of sitting down and sort of cognitively trying to reason with them, as you already know. And so very quickly, and this is not new or something that you don't already know, but assisting with their self-worth, going back to those questions that I said, what's great about you? What's good about you? What can you be proud of? And build on those strengths, as well as developing some sort of a simple vocabulary that allows them to escape, like, I'm not supposed to talk to you, you're not my friend, I don't have to stay here, and getting them to actually walk away and to practice and learn to do that. I also believe that families need to be encouraged, if their child wants to use social media, and they all do, and probably they all should, that social media for our kids needs to be monitored every day, and access needs to be controlled. This is a website by a little girl named Acacia, and you may have heard her program has been on the news. It's the benches, the friendship benches that elementary and junior highs have in their courtyards. And her whole theory is that the friendship bench is for the bully as well as somebody else who's looking for a friend. And there's just some quotes here on the next 2 pages from her website. And she just simply, she's a little girl, by the way, who has arms that are not formed adequately. And so she herself has a disability. And she started to say, I think that bullies themselves need assistance. And so this is just a quote from her, and then a quote from the principal, who says, I finally get it. We've spent millions of dollars in think tanks and anti-bullying campaigns only to see the problem growing. Now I'm beginning to understand that we can't solve the problem that way. It's not about being anti-bully, it's about being pro-friendship. And so just an attitude adjustment that I hope you'll find interesting. So what about our own communication styles? This is work from Virginia Satir and others, who say, well, there are 4 primary styles that we each have. One is the blamer. Now, none of these are bad, and all of us have, at one time or another, we use these styles. But once again, like the coping styles, when push comes to shove, we become primarily one of these types of communication individuals. So the blamer is an individual who looks at others and sort of sees what they did wrong and not what they did, but not what I'm doing wrong. I think sometimes I'm a blamer. 25% of the population is. And so this is an individual who comes to you with their finger out pointing at you saying, you didn't do enough, what do you know, etc., etc. Placaters, individuals who don't solve the problem particularly well because they don't want any problems. And so they're depicted as somebody who's down on one knee saying, oh, no, 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 I'll do whatever you want. Let's just not have any disharmony. And about 50% of the population would choose that they are placaters. The intellectual is a person who is very comfortable with the content of the message that I was discussing before. They want to talk to you about the facts, what they've learned, what they've read, what they know. They're depicted as a soldier who stands up really straight and who wants to just deal on the surface in their communications. And the last one is the irrelevant. And this is a person who's depicted as somebody who sort of just jiggles around, changes the topic, and doesn't stick necessarily with the topic at hand. And about 12.5% of the population are irrelevant as their primary style of communication. So my point here being that if you put two blamers together, if the family member is a blamer and my primary style is blaming, the two of us are probably not going to have a particularly nice conference. And so one of us has to change our style of communication. If we have two placaters, we're liable to never get anywhere in the decision making, or a professional is liable to agree to doing a lot more than they know that they're capable of getting done in a day. Intellectuals have got to somehow learn that there are emotions and get to the process of the message. And irrelevants have to learn that they do sometimes have to deal with the facts and what else is going on in their conversation. And so knowing a little bit about your communication style and the communication style of the individuals that you work with is also really very important to our communication. So working with families, we have to know ourselves. So when you have a minute to think about it, what is your coping style? And are you capable of recognizing coping styles of others and maybe helping some to get to some healthy coping styles? What's your decision-making style? Are you an immediate decision maker? Do you do a lot of cons and almost never make a decision? What is your decision-making style, and what is the decision-making style of the family that you're working with? What are your communication techniques that we've just discussed? And are you a good listener, or are you one who wants to get more to the action of telling everybody else what you understand? Back to that medical model or that educational model. This is what I know, this is what we need to do, et cetera, et cetera. We know from family and the literature that listening becomes so much more important than action cases. So what can we learn from other families who have a member with a disability? And this comes from some work that Marilyn Lash did. So she got a lot of information from families of children with special needs, and she applied it to families with brain injury. So what did we find in the literature? After traumatic brain injury, especially a moderate to severe, there is a feeling of life being changed, and it can't get fixed. Actually,
Roberta,
that is a
you're at 5
true.
minutes. Just
okay.
A 5-minute warning.
Those are true. Okay, so that's very true. The chronic sorrow that reemerges at regular intervals, repetitive patterns of despair, the fact that we have continuous life transitions and not time-limited events. We have to deal with our lives. And so there are 3 times, and this is Janelle Breese's work, she says bereavement is the event, grieving is the internal response that we have, and mourning is the external response. So the funerals, the rituals, the ceremonies. But if in traumatic brain injury we see families who get into complicated mourning, here's what we know: that it's more severe than grief, that it's different than depression, that it will require lasting support. I have a friend who lost her husband years ago. She goes out and jogs every morning, and that sounds like a good thing, except she relives the day of his death every day and cries every day. So it becomes if it becomes unaddressed, Mourning actually leads to depression, suicide, and substance abuse, things that we need to be aware of so that we can help families if they are stuck in a mourning cycle. Some other things that parents tell us, the professionals tell them they're doing either too much or too little, so they get confused. And it's hard for parents to believe that professionals are actually listening to them. So how do we include the family meaningfully? We do need to listen to the family. We need to allow them valued roles and to assist in being an advocate for themselves. And again, that was a word that you all used. You like to work with families who are good advocates, but who are not aggressive advocates. So some questions you want to ask yourself that are listed here. What additional family situations and injury may be affecting family functioning? What else is going on in the family? What really are the cultural and ethnic differences? And please don't forget to find the strengths that can be used to empower that family. Here are things we need: time as a family, the things that we can provide them, websites, emails, YouTube videos that will be very helpful, and specific ideas about how to help and what. Families are mostly often willing to do something, they just don't know what it is. So rather than, giving general ideas, giving them some real specific ideas is very, very important. And it really is essential that school personnel stay involved with the family as best they can. So we know that involving families is much more complex. We have to recognize the uniqueness of every family system. Collaboration is very difficult. We're really still working on collaborating as teams. And it's hard to bring family members in. And I am going to take 2 seconds to just explain what I mean by that. There's no consensus about knowing what a functional versus a dysfunctional family is. And what I mean by we don't bring people to the same level of collaboration, it's hard to get team members to work together sometimes. So we call that family meeting. And the family's there and they sit at the table, which I recommend. If you can have a meeting area without a table and just have some comfortable chairs in a circle, I think it works better. But anyway, the family sits down at one end. The first professional comes in, and as the other professionals come in, they sit with their friends and they sort of filter down towards the family. So the first nonverbal message is, you're with us, but you're not quite with us. And so then we give our reports, and at the end we ask the family, do you have anything you'd like to contribute? And by that time, I've been at those family meetings, and I don't have anything to contribute either because I am so overwhelmed. So using the family, informing them about conversations, letting them start the conversation oftentimes helps. And so I know I went through the back really quick. I knew I put too many slides in, I always do. But the questions that I'd like us to deal with are, what can we do now to alter? What are some practical ways to include the family? And what else would you like to talk about? So at this point, Melissa, I'll turn the questions back to you.
Okay, so like I said at the beginning, if you have any questions, now is the time to type them into the chat box. We have Roberta for about 10 or 15 more minutes. So if there's anything that she mentioned you'd like more information about, or any specific questions you have that might benefit the group about, an unnamed student, or any questions about CBERT resources, now's the time to ask. Okay, so I don't see anything popping up, but I have a couple things I'd like to tell you guys about. If you would like to access CBERT resources, we are at cbert.org. The other place you can find CBERT resources, and not only CBERT resources, but evidence-based and best practices from all across the country that we find and post, is on our Facebook page, which is CBERT Online. You can also find videos that are free for your use on our YouTube page, which is also CBERT Online. And we will be sending out an email at some point to everybody on our list who's viewed our webinars about a new training opportunity we have. called In the Classroom with Concussion. So that'll be coming everybody's way. I'll just give it a couple more seconds and see if anybody has any questions, and then we'll end if we don't. A few people have asked if the slides will be available. We post the slides after the webinar, so you guys can't read ahead. So on the CBERT webpage under webinars, and I put the link in the comments, you will be able to see Roberta's recorded webinar and the PDF of her handouts. Roberta, we have a question. It says, I have a foster family who is adopting a young child with TBI. Are there any websites that they can use to help with his development? Do you have any that you would recommend, Roberta?
Well, yeah, Ashley, CBERT is a really good one to use. There's also Brainline, www.brainline.org, and there's a whole section on kids, which I think is really good. And there are some articles about Sandy Chapman has one about the developmental stall and lag. I think, Melissa, you probably have that article.
Probably, yeah.
Your library has it, I'm sure, but I'll send it. Those two websites are probably the best at helping families with developmental issues and helping them with school issues as well.
Yes, that was Brainline. Another one, because she's talking about an 18-month-old, I don't think you saw. This is a CCC initiative. It's called Learn the Signs, Act Early. So if you search CDC and ACT, ACTEARLY, it's a free resource for preschool age, under age 5 resources. They also have an app available called Vroom. It's VROOM, and it gives daily notifications to parents of developmentally appropriate games and things they can do with their students. And it's entered in by birthday. And then they can actually log what developmental milestones the child has reached and take that to their pediatricians. And we use that a lot in Oregon with our developmentally delayed or TBI, kids with any kind of issues as a young one. So when they go to the pediatrician, they can provide a record to the pediatrician of where they are and what they can and can't do. So that's been really helpful. I'll type it in the comments. The app is called Vroom, and it goes with CDC's Act Early. So hopefully that will help you. I know we use it with our grandson, and it's great. Here's the actual site. I'll type that in. And it's specifically aimed at little ones. Helen, just send me an email. Here's my email address, and we'll get that sent to you. Whoops, that number 2 should be at. There you go. It's McCart, MCCART, at uoregon.edu is my email. So if you send me an email, it'll remind me to send you one. Bye, Aggie. Okay, so on that note, we're going to end the recording, but I also want to offer CBERT is very, very approachable. If any of you have any questions, anything you need, any resources you need, please reach out to us. We have an on-staff librarian who can find just about anything. If you ask me or Amanda a question and we don't know the answer, we will find out and connect you with somebody who does. And I'm offering Roberta. Roberta's also very approachable in terms of questions, so I'm sure she would answer some questions for you if you had some privately via email. And we'll forward that to her if you don't have her personal contacts. On that note, I am going to end the recording. Have a great day, everybody.
That's funny. Watching everybody.